peer pressure can be quite a struggle for us because we so desperately want to be accepted. So the question is, how do we handle it? Hey, welcome to Growing Up Kingdom. My name's Daniel, and I'm so excited that you're here. If you've been looking for a place where you feel like you can be encouraged, where you feel like you can grow in your confidence, this is an absolutely great place to do that. So make sure that you stick around. In this episode, I wanted to talk about dealing with peer pressure and standing strong in it, all right? We've all experienced peer pressure in some way, shape, or form. We've all experienced it where someone tries to convince us to compromise on our values, what we believe, or what we want to do. And it's in those moments that we're usually left wondering, how do we deal with this? How do we handle it? Do we go along with it? If we don't want to go along with it, how do we say we don't want to? We're going to talk about that today in part 2 of a series we're calling Living Authentically. So we all want to be accepted. That's normal. We want people to like us. We want people to think we're fun. We want people to think we're cool. That's totally understandable. There's nothing wrong with feeling like, hey, you know what? We want people to like us. It's cool for us to want to be accepted by the people around us, but it becomes dangerous when we want to be accepted so much that we're willing to compromise on our values, on what we believe, in order to be accepted by certain people. So we're going to go through a couple of key points here. Make sure you're taking notes. If you got something in front of you, take notes. If you want to just open an app on your phone, do that. But here's part number 1. We're going to understand peer pressure and its influence. There are 2 different types of peer pressure. There's direct pressure and there's indirect pressure. So direct pressure is when friends or anyone, they specifically ask us or tell us to do something. They tell us, hey, how about we do this? Hey, do that. Maybe try to do this. That's direct pressure. When someone is specifically telling you, hey, you know what? You should do this, you should do that, go do this, go do that, come do this with us, come do that with us. That's direct pressure. Now there's also indirect pressure. Indirect pressure is the pressure that we feel coming from around us in culture. We feel pressure to do certain things because of the way that culture is structured. You look at your phone, you're scrolling on some social media app, you will see people talking a certain way, dressing a certain way, posing a certain way, doing certain things. And that is indirect pressure because we see those things and then we can feel like, you know what, maybe I should be doing that. Maybe I should be acting like that. Maybe I should be talking like that. Maybe I should be taking pictures like this. Maybe I should be hanging around with those sort of people. And that's indirect pressure. So indirect pressure can be really subtle, but it can be really powerful because we have indirect pressure coming at us from everywhere. We have indirect pressure coming at us from our phones constantly. We have indirect pressure coming at us from TV. You want to get to some more antiquated sources of indirect pressure. You talk about, I don't know, books, billboards, anything you see around. It pressures you in some sense, even if it's very subtle. It tells you, paints this image that maybe you should be doing this, maybe you should be acting like this, maybe this is what you should be doing. And that's indirect pressure. Recognizing both types of pressure can help you make intentional choices in the moment. It helps to recognize, you know what, this is direct pressure. I'm feeling directly pressured to do something here. Or it also helps to say, you know what, this is indirect pressure. No one's specifically telling me to do this, but somehow I feel like I'm supposed to be doing it anyways. I'm going to give you an example from history because when we want to do something, you've heard me say it before, we need an example. We cook a recipe, we need an example. We cook food, we need an example. We need a recipe. We learn to do something, we need an example. We need to learn from someone. So we're going to go in history. We're going to look at a guy who had an interesting life. The way his story goes is he was taken captive from one country. He was taken to another country. So this is in history here. He was taken from one country, put in another country. You feel pressure to conform. You feel pressure to do certain things when you're at school and one person is doing something and you feel like maybe you should be doing that too. This fella, he got taken from a whole country, and went to a totally different country. And now he was supposed to fit into this country's rules, this country's standards, was supposed to do what he was supposed to do in this country, but he was a prisoner. So it wasn't just like, oh yeah, you know what, I don't really want to do that, forget you guys, I'm gonna go do something else. He's a prisoner here and he's supposed to be fitting into what this new country's telling him to do. Now, in terms of being a prisoner, he's actually in a pretty good situation here because turns out the king actually really liked him, thought he was really smart, thought he looked good, and thought, you know what, this smart, handsome guy could help maybe make some decisions for the country. So this guy, along with his friends, he gets special treatment from the king. They get special food, they get special stuff to drink. And in this case, this guy from history, his name happens to be the same as mine. His name was Daniel. But he decided, you know what? He got all his food, all his stuff to drink, but the food and the stuff he got to drink, although it was really, really high-class stuff, it compromised on his values. Now, we might not necessarily have specific values as to what we eat, what we don't eat. Some of you guys are like, yeah, I eat anything, absolutely anything, as long as, it's not moving. But for some of you guys, maybe, you only eat certain things, maybe you have a certain allergy, certain things, and you're like, you know what, I can't eat this, I can't eat that. Imagine though he had like a personal conviction. It wasn't like an allergy or something he couldn't eat. He was just like, you know what, I have a personal conviction that I shouldn't be eating this stuff. And he respectfully declined. He said, you know what, thank you, but no thank you. And so here he has indirect pressure from culture, but he also has direct pressure, people giving him food. And he's like, you know what, I appreciate it so much, thank you. But as a prisoner here, think about this. It's not just like, like you at school. He's an actual prisoner. He says, you know what, no thank you. If you have some vegetables, if you have some water, I'm going to drink that. And he holds to his values and says, you know what, he doesn't want what everyone's giving him. He's going to hold to his values. And in the end, at the end of his story, we realize that he outperformed all the rest of the captives that were with him, he and his guys, because they decided, you know what, they weren't going to compromise on their values. So they came into direct pressure. They had direct pressure from the government telling them, you know what, you need to eat this, you need to drink this. But it went against their values, it went against their faith, and they said, you know what, thank you, but no thank you, we're going to try to do something else. Despite the risk, they stood their ground. They decided to honor God with their values, even though it was hard. So Daniel's example, not this Daniel, that Daniel, his example shows that it takes courage to stand out. It takes courage to try different things and say, you know what, maybe I'm not going to do this. But it can be rewarding when you say, you know what, I'm going to choose to stand out from the crowd and I'm not going to do what everyone else is doing. So number 2, let's set some practical tips for standing strong. Number 1 is boundaries. Now don't click away because I said boundaries and you're like, oh yeah, I've heard boundaries before. Boundaries, I always say, are like guardrails. They're on the side of a cliff. You don't notice them if you're just driving along, but if you lose control, you'll be glad that the guardrail was there to keep you from falling off the cliff. In the same way, boundaries are there in case they're not there to just ruin life. They're there in case something goes sideways. Then you'll be glad that the boundaries were there to catch you from falling over the proverbial cliff. So when you set boundaries in advance, it's easy to stick to them under pressure. When you're in situations where you feel pressure to compromise in certain areas, people are telling you to do things, it's better to have boundaries set ahead of time so you can be clear in your mind, you know what, that's as far as I'm going, I'm not going any further. That's my limit, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, I'm doing this, I'm not doing that. It's good to have boundaries ahead of time. If you look at a lot of people in history who might have had a moral failure, something similar, it's very often because they didn't have those boundaries in place. If they set a provision for failure, they said, you know what, they didn't have those boundaries, they were a whole lot more likely to go do something because they hadn't decided ahead of time. If you don't set any boundaries and you're left to decide things in the heat of the moment, when you're feeling pressured, you're way more likely to go do something that you wouldn't have done when you weren't being pressured simply because you didn't have those boundaries there. If you're feeling pressured to do something and everything's confusing and people are telling you to do something, but you know already that you set a boundary and you're saying, you know what, I'm not doing this. It's simple, you're not doing this. Now you might still feel pressured, but at least you have that boundary there ahead of time that you've decided on it. You want to speak up and say no. There's nothing wrong with saying no. In the past, we've been conditioned from younger kids to maybe not say no. We say no and our parents say, how do you dare say no to me? I'm your parent, you got to do what I say. But in doing that, although they wanted us to do the things they wanted us to do, it could have affected our view of saying no. All of a sudden we're like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be saying no because people don't like it when I say no. But honestly, there's nothing wrong with saying no. If you have to say no, I'm not doing that, and you're holding to your values, that's powerful. Learn to say no. Learn to stand up and say no. It could be very uncomfortable. I know it's uncomfortable to say no and feel like you're going to disappoint someone else or do something that someone else doesn't want you to do. But you have to learn to say no for yourself. You can decide on some things you're going to say ahead of time. Like, it's awkward to try to figure out how to say no right on the spot, right? So think about some certain things. Someone says, hey, how about we do this? You could say, thanks, but that's not really my thing. I'd rather not. Can we do something else instead? I don't really feel like doing that. There's certain things you can say, right? Instead of just a plain no, but try to figure those out ahead of time. Sometimes the best way to avoid peer pressure is to avoid situations where you feel like you would be pressured. So a good tip is to avoid compromising situations. Avoid situations where you feel like you'd be pressured to conform to certain things. If you feel like you know, if I go to this place with these people, I'm going to feel pressured to conform. I'm going to feel pressured to do this in this area. Then it might be wise to stay away from that and say, you know what, that's probably not going to be healthy for me. Sometimes it's best to avoid giving into peer pressure it's best to avoid situations where you'd be pressured. Doesn't mean you can't be with certain friends, but it just means be smart about the situation. If you've got friends, if you know these 3 friends are going to ask you to do this if you go here. I'm not saying you can't hang out with those 3 friends. I'm just saying maybe don't go with these 3 friends here if you know they're going to have you do that, if that makes sense. Now, again, but if your friends are pressuring you to do something, if they're constantly telling you to do something, trying to get you to compromise on your values, it might be time to find yourself some new friends. I'm just going to put that out there. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. God gives us strength, He gives us love, and He gives us self-discipline. We get to choose what we do and what we don't do. And He's given us the power to make that choice. If someone tells us, hey, to do something, if someone pressures us to do something, they're not forcing us to do that. I mean, in some very rare situations, you might actually be forced to do something, but very often you do something because at some point you break down and you say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do it. But God's given us love, He's given us power, and He's given us self-discipline, a sound mind to say, you know what, there are certain things we're not going to do, and be able to stand strong in those. When we stand on God's strength, we find courage that we didn't know we had. Even though we might not be able to say no in our own strength and we feel like, you know what, I'm going to go along with it, we can trust that the Lord's got our back and that He's got the best things for us. And if we're going against standards that He set, He's going to give us the power to resist those temptations and say, you know what, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to do that. So, another practical tip, if you're feeling tempted in the moment to do something, feel pressure to do something, or even like you're in a constant state, like right now you're listening to this and you're thinking, you know what, in the back of your mind, I'm feeling pressure to do this, I'm feeling pressure to do that. Take some time right now, pray that the Lord would be with you through this temptation, that He would see you out and that He gives you the strength to say, no, you know what, I don't want to do this. And pray that He gives you the strength to stand strong in your convictions so that you don't compromise on your values. Another example, Jesus never changed His message for the people He was around. He stood strong in that he might have used different approaches for different people, but He stayed strong in who He was, even though other people wanted Him to change His message. You want an example? I think I said that in the first episode. You read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, in the Bible. You want an example? Go read those. That's your homework. So what are some action steps? Let's hit this real quick before we close. Some action steps. Number 1, identify some triggers. Where do you feel the most pressure? Is it at school? Is it with certain friends? Is it when you're doing specific things? Look at those. Try to figure those out. Identify those particular triggers. Memorize some key scriptures. Identify some verses that you can have ready with you so that you can remember those when you need strength. You can consider verses like Romans 8:31 says, if God be for us, who can be against us? That's a nice strong one. If God's for you, who can be against you enough to dissuade you from following His plan? Psalm 27:1, the Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? We might be afraid of people who try to pressure us to do certain stuff, but if the Lord's with us, really, you got the Almighty Lord behind you, you can stand strong and say, you know what, I don't want to do that. Memorize those verses, write them down if you need them. I should memorize more Bible verses. I don't, but I know where to go to find them. If you need some Bible verses to encourage you when you're feeling like you're having a hard time, I'm going to put some down in the description so you can find those, you can download those, and those are going to help you. Find yourself a mentor. Find someone you can talk to, someone who can encourage you to avoid the pressure. If you're going through something, if you're feeling you're compromised in an area, it's great to have someone you can talk to and say, hey, you know what, I'm feeling pressured in this area, and they can help you through that. All right? So, I hope this helped you. I hope this helps you realize, you know what, I don't have to conform to what everyone wants me to do. It's okay to stand out, and I hope I gave you some good tips to stand out. If this did help you, let me know down in the comments. What did you learn? Is there anything I missed? Make sure you let me know. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and catch you in the next episode of Growing Up Kingdom. I'll see you. Bye.